We've learned so much. I mean, really, you're going from sort of 0 to light speed in 3 weeks.
It's always been the culture of Comcast to work with entrepreneurs. And when we get to work with startups, some of that spirit transfers onto us. We're really excited to bring these startups to Philadelphia.
It was awesome to get to experience really Philly from day one by going to a Phillies game. That was a really great experience, and I think showed us part of the lifeblood of what is Comcast NBCU.
It's important to bring Lift Lab founders to Philadelphia so that they can interact and engage in the product mindset of this company.
We're here on the backlot at Universal, where they're going to be meeting with studio executives, investors, and people from across the entertainment industry.
Just driving to the set, I just couldn't stop staring out the window and be like, oh, I recognize that movie or this show. It was just a magical experience.
I've been involved with Lift Labs from the beginning. It's always been a great network for me to meet startups who are building really cool products and thinking about how we can apply them to our business across Comcast and NBC Universal.
The week here in LA is mind-blowing. We're meeting VCs and the business units at Universal and Sky.
So I was telling my parents, I grew up wanted to work for DreamWorks, but now I'm pitching to DreamWorks about a product. So for me personally, I just feel really lucky to be part of this program.
We're in New York City today. Just had a bunch of media and PR training for tomorrow's session at the New York Stock Exchange, where we'll be interviewed.
I've been watching people ring the bell on the TV all the time, so getting closer is just an actual motivation for me.
Today we're just startups. Tomorrow maybe the future company is going public.
Hi. Hi. Welcome to our March Civic cocktail. How many of you are first timers? Oh, well, we got to change that. Well, we're so happy to have you here. I'm excited about this topic tonight. When we kicked off our series, our Civic cocktails for the year, which was last month, we decided to do something around technology and democracy, and clearly, this is an important topic. So last month, we did cybersecurity and misinformation, and tonight we're going to be talking about AI, which everybody's talking about right now. So I think this is going to be a great panel, looking at it from the government perspective and then from the business perspective. We look forward to your questions that you may ask. There will be a Q&A session for both of those, and our moderator will let you know when it's time to stand up for that. And so when it is Q&A time, there's a microphone right over there by that second cubby that my colleague Jeff will be taking care of. So with that, I am Alicia Crank, the Executive Director of Seattle City Club. I am so grateful to have you all here tonight, and I want to do a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. So in my old task of being an executive director of a leadership program, everyone silence your phones. You don't have to turn it off. Just silence, please. We will have 2 segments with a 10-minute intermission in between, so we will give you opportunity to refresh your chosen beverage. I do want to thank the staff of the Collective Seattle. They make this place very homey for us and do all the work in putting this all together, so thank you, staff. Also to Bermudez Media, who makes us look good on camera. And to our Civic Cocktail presenting sponsor, Comcast, who I know is in the room tonight, so thank you so much. We also did a special partnership for this 2-part democracy and technology session, and that was with WTIA, so thank you for that partnership in doing that. And if you have an organization that wants to partner with us like that as well, come talk to me. And again, and another special thank you to our CEO members. If you're a member, raise your hand. Thank you so much. Now, if you're wondering, what the heck, I'm not a CEO. Well, CEO stands for Civically Engaged Organization or Individual. And I would encourage you to check out our membership structure and become a member, because once you become a member, you get to come to these for the rest of the year without paying a dime. That's a good deal. And especially if you have one as an organization, your colleagues get to come with you free of charge after you've paid your membership. So don't say that you did not get a good deal tonight, because I think that's the best one you're going to get for a while. And I do want to shout out our organizational members, because I know they're in the room tonight. Compass Housing, Edelman, Monument Advocacy, Visit Seattle, Level Seattle, which is an amazing hotel, by the way, City Year Seattle, WSU Everett, and LISC. So again, thank you so much. And with that, I am going to turn things over to our moderator for the evening, Karen Weiss.
Hi, I'm Karen. I'll be sitting here this evening, and our first panel is about AI and government. And we have two great guests who can help speak about the state and municipal city level here. So we have Jim Loader, who's the Chief Technology Officer for the City of Seattle, and Kelly Fukai, who's a VP with WTIA. So please come on up. And I guess I should have introduced myself for a hot second more. I'm the technology correspondent for the New York Times here in Seattle. I've been on the job for about 5.5 years, and the past 16, 18 months has been AI central. So this is kind of a lot turned on a dime, and we're going to talk about why that is and what that means. So, Kelly, can you start just by introducing yourself, what you do, who you are, and what you do, basically?
Great, thank you, and it's great to see this room tonight. I am Kelly Fukai. I'm the Vice President of Government and Community Affairs for the Washington Technology Industry Association. We are a statewide tech trade association. We represent about 1,000 companies across the state, and our mission is to and essentially empower our tech community to be more inclusive, more equitable, and support our thriving communities across the state.
Jim Loader, I'm the Chief Technology Officer and Department Director for the Seattle Information Technology Department for the City of Seattle.
I thought we might start with trying to discuss what is AI in the sense of what we're talking about now. Why is this like a panel that had to happen this year? So maybe Jim, can you go first about what you think, how would you describe it right now?
Well, I mean, I guess I'll say the definition of artificial intelligence is, there are many definitions for artificial intelligence. And certainly what we know as AI has been around for a very long time. I think what prompted us at the city to begin looking at it as an area to enact internal policy. And I do want to clarify, I'm talking about the policy that applies to city employees. We are not enacting public policy at the city level around artificial intelligence or its use. You know, though what we do at the city does have a public impact, so indirectly, I suppose, we're having some influence on public policy. We became interested in it, and it got onto our radar as something we needed to act on at the early part of last year, along with probably everybody else who was hearing about this, you know, interesting new app called ChatGPT that you could ask it to generate poetry, and it would sort of kind of generate something that looks like poetry. And we ask ourselves questions when new technologies or emerging technologies come into the public space all the time. And the questions generally are, is there anything really new here? Is there anything new or novel in terms of risks or capabilities that we should be paying attention to? And how do we then how do we understand that for our constituents throughout the city, throughout the city government, and help enact the guidelines that they need to be successful in using it in a responsible manner? And so we asked, are there new and novel risks here? And we said yes. You know, we had not encountered anything really at this scale or level of popularity that could produce new material on behalf of, that could be represented as speaking on behalf of the city. So that was sort of fundamental point number one. Fundamental point number two was, is there anything useful that this could do for us? Do we think that city employees are going to want to use this technology? And again, the answer to that was yes, because almost instantly people were asking us, can we use ChatGPT for this, that, or the other thing? So those were really the 2 points where if the answer is yes to those, then we take a deeper look. You know, a few years ago, for example, you know, there were new and novel risks aplenty around, say, blockchain technology, but you know, there were no discernible use cases for it, so we didn't bother looking at it. This was different, right? This was something that both introduced risk to the environment and people wanted to use for legitimate purposes. So that's how we started our journey in enacting city policy, and now we're starting the journey to flesh out the use cases and understand what is it really good for, and where should we be using it, and where should we not be using it.
When you speak with the technology industry in the state and the legislators that you speak with, how do they talk about the risks and the rewards or the potential of this kind of new era, this kind of, if you shorthand as the ChatGPT era, but this era of generative AI?
I think there's a lot of things going on, and Jim has brought up some points that artificial intelligence has been used for decades already. We've been using it in ways, using it to solve problems on the electric power grid with algorithms that are created to anticipate where faults will occur on a system. We've been using it in medical research to help come up with new uses for drugs and drug studies, and it's been out there, right? We also been using it in our email. How many of you have been using Gmail and it predicts the next word or a saying that you might use? Like that's been artificial intelligence that we've all been consuming. But as Jim pointed out, ChatGPT really brought it to the forefront, brought it to the mainstream in a usable way that has heightened interest, right? And lots of opportunities, but also lots of areas of concern. So I think for one, at the government level and how we're hearing about it from legislators, elected officials, is really some of them just quite honestly are struggling with what is it? Like, we haven't thought about it in this way. We don't know what it is. I don't know what I'm actually being asked to regulate. And the use cases that are being contemplated right now in legislatures. Right now, there's over 250 bills across 42 states looking at various uses of AI, everything from deepfakes in elections to full AI regulatory frameworks to intimate images, how the images are created and used to negatively impact people. And so that's what they're hearing from their constituencies. That's what they're being asked to address. And they're trying to honestly get their arms around it, just like most people, I think, are trying to get their arms around it. I'm a mom, I have kids in school, they're using AI, but they're also asking questions about AI. Our education system is struggling with how it gets integrated in. So I think that at a base level, we're all just trying to understand what is it that we're talking about and what are those impacts that we need to consider and address. And so that's what I would say our legislature here in Washington really has been focused on this session, is just trying to get a baseline of understanding around what it is we're really dealing with here.
What is sort of the role at the state level? Like, what should the state's role be? And is that contested, or is there a question about what a state should do?
I think I don't know, well, yes, there's always, there's varying opinions within the state about what the state should do. Holistically, I would say what we have to think about is technology has no boundaries. And so we all would, as an industry, would say that certainly we would prefer some type of federal framework. And President Biden has already issued an executive order, has done a blueprint for AI. There are NIST standards that are being created. There are several works that are already being, contemplated around a federal framework. But, if we are real, we haven't been able to enact a federal data privacy regime. And so let's just say there's a lot of skepticism around what the federal government will actually be able to get done in this environment, and given the challenges that the government has had in the past. So states are looking at it and saying, where is the right place for us to intervene? Where should we be considering that? And for Washington State, we've just passed a task force bill to really look at these issues and start to pick apart, where should Washington State be? What are the gaps in the system currently that are not being protected with potential use cases for AI? How can we think about the economic development opportunity for our state? Our state is heavily dependent upon technology as a economic driver. So we want to make sure that we are able to innovate and create, but we want to be thoughtful about that. We need to think about a workforce. One of the key things that the state can do is help make sure that we have a resilient and robust and diverse workforce to be able to support this technology as it grows forward, and to be able to bring in that diverse perspective as we develop technology, but also as we apply that technology in the future.
So it sounds like there's a bit of a kind of fact-finding period now, and it sounds like the city has a sort of a mini version, a city-level version of that. Can you talk about what that is and what you're learning?
Yeah, and I think those are all excellent points. I'm glad you brought up privacy just as an example, because that was one of the first, because we have a very well-developed privacy program at the city, that was really the first blip on the radar, really, which was the idea that because we don't know what data is in these large language models, or what the impact is for city employees, for example, to feed data into the large language models inadvertently, privacy was really the first spoke on the wheel, that we looked at. And there is no federal policy. So I think we are running the risk of having 50 different patchwork quilt of different regulations throughout the country, and also there's a coalition of city governments working on this as well, and hopefully the intent there is to align regulatory frameworks at the local levels, but there's a lot of diversity in opinion among the participants in that coalition as well. So yeah, unfortunately, I think we are going to end up in a situation where there are different regulatory frameworks for a while. And that's not anything new, but it's unfortunate if you're trying to do business in that environment. It's unfortunate if you're trying to interact or collaborate with in my case, cities in different states, or states and companies that are housed in different states. So yeah, the fact finding that we did initially was, I think, just trying to figure out what the domain of the problem is. So we initially set up a cross-sector policy advisory group that included researchers from the University of Washington through their tech policy lab, from the Allen Institute, and Nicole is here somewhere from the Allen Institute. There she is. And her team helped advise us on that, as well as members of our city's Community Technology Advisory Board. And that was the first phase, the first stab that they took at it, that they took a look at, which was, is our scope, are we limiting ourselves to just generative AI and the GPT class of technology, or are we thinking more broadly about AI, and how do we even do that? And we had a lot of success in enacting our privacy policy by approaching a principles-based approach to it. So instead of issuing our city workers a list of do's and don'ts, we issued, I think it's 6 general principles, or general, they're kind of like guidelines, or North Stars, if you will, around how to collect data, from whom you should collect data, how long to keep data, standard points. And the group eventually, the AI advisory group eventually settled on that as a good model for us as well. So, our policy doesn't say you can only use these tools, you can use them for these purposes and these, not these others. It's more about, if you are using a tool, it has to have these characteristics, and you have to remember that you work for a city government, and what you do makes a difference for people. You are representing people. So you do have to care about veracity and the truth of the information you're publishing. You do, if you are using a tool to speak on behalf of the city, acknowledge that. You do have to care about whether you are inadvertently stomping on people's intellectual property. Certainly you do have to care about correcting for or investigating your results for bias. So there's a set of principles that I think just reflect the values of the city government that comprise the core of our policy.
Why are those examples, for example, bias or the veracity, the truth, the reliability of this information, why is that an issue with this type of technology?
Yeah, well, the large language model is not, I mean, the large language model basis for these GPT types of technologies, it's not, intelligence and language are both terms that are used in conjunction with this and that are in no way actually present in the technology. So you have to remember, I think, you mentioned predictive text on your phone. I think, or maybe did you? I'm sorry, I forgot to say. Somebody brought up predictive text messaging or predictive text on your phone or on Google Docs. That was it. Sorry, and that's kind of what it's doing at a massive scale. It's anticipating and using various probabilistic algorithms to say, in this context, given this prompt, most of the information I've been fed would say this word or this phrase next. And so there's no referent. There's no referent to facts or meaning in the output. One of the researchers that we worked with at the UW, Dr. Emily Bender, coined the term stochastic parrot to describe these technologies, which I think is a great term. And again, it's not taking away the fact that these kinds of tools can be actually useful in a lot of cases, right? It's just reminding us that there's an appearance of intelligence, there's an appearance, but they're tuned to sound confident and to appear to be, producing legible information. But I mentioned to you I had this experience the other day where I was filing my taxes, brag, and and I got to the end of the process, and the little cursor was spinning and saying, we're validating your whatever, we're justifying the $120 you're paying us, or whatever it's doing, and it generated a paragraph that it cited was generative AI generated, 4 sentences. This is why you're not getting a refund, blah, 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 blah. Problem was, I was getting a refund, and the amount I was getting refunded was also right there on the screen. And it said 2 of the reasons I wasn't getting a refund is because of the capital gains that I have, which I had none, and all the rental income that I had, which I had none. So my first thought was, crap, I made a mistake. I need to go back and go through every single step of this process again and look for the error. And there were no errors. And when I got to the end, same thing happened, but a completely different paragraph with 2 additional new errors was generated for me. And so I think it's one of those things where I'm wondering, is this a function of the immaturity of the technology, or is this inherent in the way the technology is designed and developed, right? Is throwing more data at the problem the answer? Is tuning and taking time to learn more the answer? Or is this just something that will never really work well when you care about facts, when you care about when you care about accuracy? And it's okay that it's not, right? I think one of the biggest problems is the way the technology came into existence, came into our consciousness, and the way it's being marketed as a general purpose tool. It's fine if it's not. It's fine if it's only good for certain things, but let's do the work to determine what those things are and use it for that. And luckily, there are some good efforts out there that we're paying attention to, organizations that are assessing and using it. There was one I was reading just last night, and I didn't add it to my notes, but a programmer is running, hundreds of different programming tests against all the major GPT and code generating tools, and determining it's actually good at doing these things, it's not good at doing these things, it's not good at doing these things, and that's useful information to have. So I just think it's important for us to all keep that in mind as we go through using this technology.
This is this question of, is this massive technological revolution that's going to spell, the end of times? There's all these doomsday, technology is going to take over itself and all of us, or it can't get, your tax filing correct. How does that speak to, or how do you manage those polarizing or different perceptions of it in the context of the speed of which people are trying to regulate, or there's a sense that people need to regulate. On one hand, there's so much development going on. On another hand, it got the tax forms wrong. I think we all, people who play with it all have examples like that. So how do you balance those two ideas?
Well, I think that really that's the challenge, right? And I will say, like, on the one hand, when have you ever known policy to be the fastest thing happening in the space, right? Like, it's very rare that that is actually occurring. So I think from that perspective, we say policy won't be the thing that is driving it. So then what? And that really then becomes incumbent upon all of us, industry, government, constituents, citizenry, having conversations like these, asking the questions of your government. What are you using these things for? How is this impacting me? Industry also challenging itself, looking at their algorithms, looking at their, transparency in their in what they're doing. I think, and those are reasons why in Biden's executive order, those are, the principle-based approach to this, because we're going to have to do that, because the policy is really an on-off button. It's not been something that we can, gently step into. And I actually think this is a good example of an opportunity to have a conversation around policy and say, maybe in things like technology, perhaps we should think about a policy approach that is more modern and can address this, where there's things called like regulatory sandboxes, and this would be more like a policy sandbox where we put stops in to say, hey, at this point we need to stop and reevaluate. What is happening here? What are the impacts? What's the feedback that we're getting? How is this working? And then we pivot. We create laws and, we set them forever, right? They just go in perpetuity. And technology doesn't do that. And so it's very hard to regulate something like that when you have a system that just sets things up in perpetuity, but technology is changing. And I'm here to tell you guys, ChatGPT is not the end of this, and there's already technologies that are being developed that are well underway. There are use cases that are starting that will eclipse this in the future. And so we can create a policy for the creation of the internet. We create a policy for ChatGPT. What's next? Again, the policy is not going to be the savior here. We collectively have to do this work together. And so I think these types of engagements where we're bringing industry, where we're bringing government, where we're bringing citizens to have these conversations is really, really critical. And that's why most people would say task forces, what do? They never do anything. Nothing comes of them. Let's make something come of them. And that's incumbent upon every one of us who sits in that room to do that and make sure that we actually are, making this a successful outcome for people and not a Skynet situation where all of a sudden robots are running the world. And as Jim pointed out, we are not there yet. I would love for our UW folks to talk about it. It is not as intelligent as you think it is. It is literally predicting next words, next pixels, next whatever, based on a series of data that is put forth into, its training models. So we aren't quite there yet on technology, but we do know some things are coming next, and it's not just artificial intelligence or generative artificial intelligence. It's other things.
We have time for questions now from you all.
I don't know if either one of you are familiar with Logically AI. They're a British AI company that was hired by the Secretary of State. And they're more or less screen scraping social media to look for election integrity threats. I've been tagged 10 times. One of them was just asking the Secretary of State to do something, and I got deemed an election threat. Where do we draw the line between using AI for safety and respecting First Amendment rights?
Yeah, no, I'm not familiar with that tool. And I guess my answer to that, sort of putting on a pragmatic, policymaker hat, would be, do we have any other protections in place for something that, for example, could be construed as surveillance technology? I'm not sure of, the details of how that works, but, I'm thinking a privacy framework, surveillance tech, whether it's AI or not might be sort of immaterial to the harm that you're anticipating or thinking about. That would be my first question is AI just sort of a red herring in this situation, and is there some other framework that may be in place or that may be needed for something like that?
These are the important conversations that need to, what are the high risk use cases, right, that we need to think about, and how do we balance, to your point, privacy versus national security? And obviously, you know, the federal government is keenly aware of this. They're looking at this. This is what part of the NIST framework and the standards that they're looking at, you know, around how do we balance both of these things? That, you know, I don't have the answers to all of that. Jim doesn't have the answers to all of that. Wish that we did, but I think that these are the types of use cases and these are the types of instances that we need to think about, and we need to have conversations around how do we protect all those things. And I will say, I think we AI, whatever technology comes next, we really do have to have a real conversation about data privacy, and it needs to be some type of federal framework that is established, because we've created a patchwork of data privacy, and in some cases it's partial data privacy around certain types of information, and we need to fix that. Like, we can't be messing around with this anymore. We got to get real serious about this.
Hi, thank you for your service. You mentioned that you put together a study group with the University of Washington and the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence. Wondering what's the logic and the thinking behind excluding the companies that are building the AI in the discussion?
Yes, it's a good question, and they were. So we invited them to the policy advisory meetings to present and meet with the members of the advisory team. So we have other channels where we're talking with them on a fairly regular basis, but they definitely were included in part of the policy development.
I have a dual use interest in this question. I'm an engineer with the state of Washington, and I'm also a venture partner with a local VC firm. I wanted to know how useful that advisory council has been to you guys to make decisions at the city level, just for my own personal interest to try to push a type of advisory council at the state level.
So I should clarify, it's not a standing advisory council. They were formed for the purpose of advising us on this one particular policy. I found the process extremely useful. I found the members very engaged. And quite frankly, I mean, as the manager of the department, I was interested in this use case as kind of a test of this model to help us address the next emerging technology, whatever that might be, so that we're not developing policy in a vacuum, where we are welcoming in community voices through our Community Technology Advisory Board and our research and university, and possibly, depending on the technology, industry partners. So that model, I think, worked really well. I think we learned a lot about how to engage those parties, how not to necessarily take advantage of them, because it was all voluntary. And they produced a report that then our internal policy team distilled down to the actual city policy that we published back in October. So I thought the model worked really well, and the next thing that pops up onto the radar that requires us to that presents new and novel risks and presents a lot of interesting use cases, we'll probably do something like that again.
I'll end on something very practical. What has been the best use you each have found in your work or your life for this new era of tech?
Besides writing letters to legislators. Well, I was just talking to some of my colleagues right before this. I was actually at an event out at the University of Washington, and they were sharing some work that was being done in the mental health space. And there was an interesting use case around an online artificial intelligent tool to help folks work through some cognitive cognitive dissonance therapy, essentially, around, like, when we ruminate on something. When something bad happens to us and we all get in our head and we think that's the end of the world and these things are terrible and this is the worst thing and I'm never going to do this or I'm never going to do that. There's a tool that's available online for folks to interact with that helps get them out of that, kind of rumination and And it was fascinating. The data behind it was fascinating around the success rate and the ability to actually help people in a way that was meaningful. And so that to me was like a huge win for what artificial intelligence can do when it's applied in the right way. And so that's something that I got really excited about, among a whole host of other interesting research that's going on in this space. But mental health, and in the medical industry in particular, I think there's a lot of opportunity for this technology to really advance this in a meaningful and fast way.
Yeah, at the city, there's a couple of things that are interesting happening. So our Department of Transportation is using an AI and machine learning system to analyze traffic camera data for near-miss collision situations and other infractions in intersections. And the reason why that's interesting, a lot of cities are doing that, is they're doing it with existing technology that's already been deployed, as opposed to adding new sensors and adding new equipment that could fail or present a security vulnerability, or would need a battery changed, or require some sort of maintenance and upgrade. So they're not adding to the city's infrastructure, they're just leveraging what's already there and relying on sophisticated video image processing to identify the highest risk intersections in the city, and doing that so that they don't have to have people sitting and just watching the traffic camera and doing all the stuff. I said to the department director at one point, I'm like, oh, I'm sure it's gonna prevent you from like having to lay the pneumatic tubes down on the street to kind of traffic. He's like, no, we still do that because it actually works. And it's a reliable technology. We don't need real-time monitoring of many of our streets. Traffic patterns are pretty predictable. Doing sampling is fine. But in this one use case, they're finding the AI and the machine learning of processing the video data to be extremely useful. Internal to the city, certainly the communications and the writing. And so that's the use case that we are currently evaluating and determining, is our policy actually providing the right guidance to people who are using this tool to generate, whether it's web page content, blog posts, drafts of policies, drafts of legislation, and we're not dictating a particular rubric, but we are saying that if you want your use case, your pilot program to be approved, you have to essentially define a thesis or a research question that you're solving with this, and then demonstrate or compare the results to what you predicted would come out of it. And forcing people to do a little bit of work instead of just treating a pilot project as the first step toward an inevitable expansion of the program. Like, no, we want you to actually make a decision at the end of the pilot that this either worked or it didn't work, and we will use that to determine if our policy was effective.
Last question for you all is, if someone wanted to get more engaged or involved with these issues at the city or state level, what would you recommend they do?
Join WTIA. I think get involved in these forums like this. Number one, you can get yourself connected to what's going on, talk to your legislators. Number two, one of the things I will say that our legislators ask a lot of us is, what are your constituents saying about it? What is their concerns? How can we help? Let's give the legislature a lot of credit in the sense that there is very few people in the legislature who have any background experience at all in technology. I mean, we're talking about less than, the number of fingers of one hand. So they need to hear from you all and from a vast majority of our constituents in this room about what they're seeing. Help, be informed, be engaging, ask questions, help give them use cases, tell them what you're seeing both on the good and on the bad side, so that they are more informed and able to help put their minds around how can we, from a policy perspective, help this conversation.
Yeah, similarly, we do have a community technology advisory board. I think the membership for that, the membership cycle just ended, but that's a great opportunity to get involved. And I mentioned earlier that engaging this policy advisory team was really, I kind of had an ulterior motive of testing this model out. I had another ulterior motive, which was to actually engage that group in actual city work, policy development work. They do a lot for the city. They that board makes decisions about our technology matching fund grant program. They've advised us a lot on privacy, on telecom. They're reviewing our cable television franchise agreement. So, hey, Comcast. But there's a lot of expertise in that group, and I think that we could have been and should have been leveraging them a lot more than we have been in the past. So I'm always looking for opportunities to do that. And then, if you live in Seattle, talk to your council member. If you want to email me, just send a note to seattleIT@seattle.gov, and then it'll get to me, and you can ask me directly how you can get involved.
Thank you both so much. We have a 10-minute break before our second panel, so you can go chat it up, get your drink refill, and see you soon.
Welcome back. Seriously, wasn't that a good first session? And did you understand most of it? Yeah? That's really good. Well, we're going to now talk about it from the corporate business side. So I am going to hand things back over to Karen so she can continue moderating this amazing discussion.
Thanks for sticking with us, everyone. So we've got our second panel here with a great group of panelists. We have Mary Snap from Microsoft, Nicole DiCario from the Allen Institute, and Peter Hallinan, from Amazon. And I was wondering if you guys could just go down the row for a minute and explain briefly, who you are and what your role is, like why you're here, basically.
Well, I think you're pointing at me, so I'll start.
Thanks.
Mary Snap, Microsoft. It's just part of what I say now because I've been there now for about 35 years or so. Spent most of the time as a lawyer, as Deputy General Counsel, supporting all of the engineering teams. So hopeful that that brings me a little bit of an ability to talk engineers speak and understand a little about the technology that we're talking about tonight. But I, at some point, left being a lawyer for Microsoft and led our global philanthropies, so became very involved in STEM education, skilling, and now we're talking a lot about skilling and AI fluencies for what some are calling the future of work. So in the last 6 or 8 months in my never-ending quest to avoid retirement, I have taken on a role to spend some time talking to groups, government groups, influentials, and citizens about artificial intelligence and how companies should deploy it and develop it responsibly and in collaboration with other important stakeholders like you all in the room tonight. So I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Hi there, I'm Nicole DiCario. I'm with the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence, not to be confused with the building over there where the brain and the immunology and the cell science teams are. We're one of the other Allen Institutes. My role at AI2 is focused on AI and society. So I work on AI safety and ethics, AI policy, and AI literacy. AI2 is a nonprofit research institute, so while we're talking about business and industry today, our team operates on creating these, foundational pieces of research and technology that power things that companies use eventually, potentially, because they're released openly. And so the reason I work on these 3 different buckets are because I call them the recipe for, successful and responsible AI. If we have more safely and ethically developed AI from the start, and we have policy that is effective, and we have policy that is, doing what it's supposed to do, which is regulate appropriately, and we have a literate, AI fluent population, then we can say that we're doing things right. And I'm going to say we're probably operating at like a quarter tank on each of those metrics right now. So that's why I do what I do, because I have 3 quarters to go in each of these buckets. So I will be where you are, saying I'm never going to retire one day.
Yeah, but that's why you have Greg and me in between you, so we can buffer.
Great.
We can buffer.
Hi, I'm Peter Hallinan with Amazon. I lead a team at AWS that advances the science and the practice of responsible AI. And I think that's the reason for my being on this panel tonight. A little bit about my background, PhD in AI from Harvard, and then a stint as a teaching fellow at the Kennedy School of Government. And then things got a little ziggy and zaggy, and I spent a bunch of time doing growth strategy for large companies, ended up doing a spin out to start a sort of a rapid pediatric clinical trial network, loved spinning up something new, went into venture development, companies usually with social impact, and then ended up selling a company to Amazon that had developed technology for the blind and low vision population, sort of state-of-the-art computer vision. And then at Amazon, got involved when ML was not as popular as it is today to work in data, and then moved on to responsible AI. So that's a little bit of the journey there. So hopefully, I'm looking forward to this as well.
I was hoping Peter could start with a mini technology lesson about how these systems work and why it is that it's different from other types of technologies, such that we have panels talking about how to use them responsibly and things like that. That this is how they function and what's the kind of key newness, even though there's been a long history broadly of other iterations.
Yeah, so there's a couple of levels to answering that question. Let me try and hit both of them very, very quickly. So at one level, when we talk about rolling out AI, everyone gets very excited when you talk about AI, but if I told you that we were really rolling out statistics, you might not have even shown up tonight. But that's kind of at the core of it, and it turns out that smart software, like you cannot think of AI as smart software. It's not the same as traditional software for a number of reasons. When you kind of define what the software is doing, you're using data sets, you're not using human language. That brings with it a whole set of implications and challenges because none of us speak data set. Okay, we don't have processes, product managers don't speak data set, they speak English, et cetera. There's other issues that come with this. So for example, when you're using statistics, when you build a system around statistics, right, you built it based on a particular data set that you had access to. And then someone else is going to come along and try and use your product, and maybe their data, the assumptions underlying their data, don't match the assumptions underlying your data. So if you add privacy into the mix, for example, AWS, like, we don't look at anyone's data. They use an AI service. They're putting their data in. We never see it. What does that mean? That means that that person putting their data into the system has to sort of test and make sure that they're getting out what they expect to get out. And again, with traditional software, you would have expected that whoever built it can guarantee that it works. But here there's more of a shared responsibility model. And so that has implications for how companies do this. So there's a number of things like this that are just fundamentally different that I think the entire sort of industry of people using this technology has not quite absorbed yet. But that's the first layer. The second layer, very quickly, I think we've been talking about large language models at times tonight. And I think our previous panel talked a little bit about how they work. But really what's going on is that you take a bunch of documents and you calculate the probability that, this won't be entirely technically accurate, but you calculate the probability that one word follows another, okay? And then you sort of You know, so you put the into the system, and it knows that the next most likely word is going to be, I don't know, dog. And so it guesses dog. And then what's the next most likely word after that? 8. And then maybe it's my, and then it's homework, and it comes up with something, okay? And maybe you're going to take the most likely word or the second most likely word, and you can vary it a little bit, but you produce content like this. And if you produce content like this, how many of you think that it's what's going to come out is guaranteed to be, you know, truthful and accurate? Raise your hand if you think that's a process for generating, right? It's a process for generating very, very realistic English. You know, it gets you fluency, but it doesn't necessarily get you accuracy. And so then there's other techniques that people begin to layer on to try and correct for this. But built into this architecture, which is a great, you know, it's a very clever architecture, it moves the field forward, but it's not enough. And so for those of you who have concerns about Skynet and, you know, existential risk, you know, I can't speak to what's going to exist 50 years from now, but today, you know, rest assured, you know, that's what we're talking about, right? And on the image side, it's actually a little trickier, but it's not any smarter.
So Karen, I thank you, Peter. I wanted to take just a step way far back to think about what this technology is, because I do think that it is transformational. But it's not all new technology. And if you think about it, we always like to talk about technology stacks, you know? So if you think about the technology stack for what enables this to happen, you start at the very bottom with broadband connectivity and being able to have connectivity at very high speeds, because you need that for any of this to work. You then need chips, and these are these graphics processing units that can compute multiple times faster and smarter than we've ever been able to do before. And right now, those chips are in short supply. You've been probably reading a lot about NVIDIA stock. They're the main guys who are making the chips. That won't, you know, hopefully we'll have much more supply of chips. Then you have the databases, the stacks and stacks and stacks in a full campus just of servers, just of gray boxes in the wall that really use those graphics chips to compute the data sets that Peter talked about. On top of that, then you have the applications that people are building to get into the data sets, to get the insights. You think about ChatGPT for that. There are then a lot of softwares and software developers, people who have companies who are developing their own language models. Like right now, we host about 1,600 language models on our Azure services from individual people. I'm guessing Amazon might be somewhere kind of, you know, close to that too with some of that work. And so there are the developers, and then there are the users. So if you think about it, it is a stack of technology, each of which needs to be tested for safety, for security, each of which has different, sometimes companies working on it. It's not, you know, one vertical thing with one company. There are a lot of different companies. But we really think about this in some ways as kind of akin to the printing press in 1400. And when the printing press, it was an invention of the mind. This will be an invention of the mind, not because it will be intelligent, but because it will enhance human ingenuity. They're in both good ways and in bad ways. And I know we're going to talk about some of that too, but it itself is not intelligent, but it will enhance all of us. And some of us are great people. Everyone in this room is a great person. And then, you know, maybe some not so much, so.
I would just add with the other piece of this, I feel like we're building a cake here, we've got like all the layers, is the influence AI has on so many other things. It comes up in every conversation. National security, shopping, stocks, finance, health, it's everywhere. And so I can't think of another technology that comes up everywhere, education. And so that is one of the unique factors of this, is that it's so pervasive and it has such impact and influence over our everyday lives, whether we know it, whether we like it or not.
Is there consensus, any of you feel free, on what responsible AI even means? Okay, go.
There's not. I think they're kind of buzzwords. There's safety, there's ethics, there's responsible. And I say that because if we poll, even us, we'll get different definitions. They will have a similar rinse, but I think there's not clear definition. AI has a definition problem, in my opinion, for a lot of words. But responsible for who? For what? Like, all of those things have to be defined, and there's not a centralized place where that's happening right now, which then means, how do you act on that? And so, responsible AI, safety and ethics, fairness, I think we've mentioned all those words. They're used interchangeably a lot of times, but I do think they have different meaning.
And I would agree. There's no one definition of that. And, we talk about it a certain way at Microsoft, and we have a website that's Responsible AI. You'll find all kinds of materials there that we add to regularly. I know Amazon has something similar. What I would say, though, is that there are beginning to be convenings around the globe for people and government to come together with various stakeholders to try to come to some standards that are multilateral. And so that process, it will take it will take some years. I mean...
You might be retired by then.
I might. I might. You could come to my party. But that process is going slowly. I will say there's some amount of competition between the G7 countries and the G20 countries and the UN-affiliated entities. But at some point, these sort of need to come together so that we can really talk about what is responsible, what kind of regulation needs to be in place, and other things that, not necessarily regulation, but just ethical uses.
All right, I'm going to throw in a slightly different 2 cents, which is that, yes, I mean, there are different definitions of responsible AI, but, under the hood, there are certain technical properties that you want in these systems. You want robustness, you want fairness, you want veracity, et cetera. And these will have different meanings and different implications in different contexts, but you can systematically approach this. You can have teams who are either building AI applications or building AI models or deploying AI applications, think systematically through the issues and arrive at good results. There are secrets to success in AI, and they're kind of prosaic. Like, one of them, like the single most important thing, right, which is to work with narrowly defined use cases. So if you consider, like, a lot of people will say face recognition, that's a use case, right? Well, it's not. You could be trying to look up the image of a face of a child you found in a database of missing children, right? Or you could be trying to find, a scene in a library of movie clips that has a particular actor, and you're going to tune your systems very differently. When you're trying to find the child, you're going to want to find any possible match, right? When you're trying to find the actor, there are going to be zillions of frames of that actor, so you're going to try and only return the ones where you're absolutely certain. And when you define things narrowly, it's much easier to ask questions about what is fair. And if I can only be partially fair, okay, then maybe I can be transparent about those parts that I'm not, so that I can at least experiment with something which is a work in progress and just be clear with everybody that that's what we're doing, and thereby make progress. So anyway, that's, there are other secrets to success as well, but that's a starting point. So I think all of this you can make progress today, systematically and thoughtfully.
And I do think one of the, people are starting to put methodologies in place that, we're getting better and better at, red teaming being an example of, before you release a product or a service, you actually have people from all different diverse backgrounds try to test the system and try to break it, try to get it deliberately to return something that's negative or not true, so that you can mitigate against that risk before it's released. So when we talk about how we develop systems, you'll hear people talk about words that Peter knows better than I, classifiers and things like that, and red teaming. But there are a set of processes prior to release that companies like Amazon and Google are very, very much using along with us.
Nicole, can you talk about open source. This is something the Allen Institute has done. What is it, and how does it fit into this conversation?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's one, again, has a bit of a definition problem. What is open? What is open source? The open source software community has a very specific definition, and I think that AI is kind of latched on to this open source definition from that, which is, you release something and there's no restrictions for its use, basically. Today, AI systems often have licenses. What are the use cases? How can they be duplicated, et cetera? AI2 recently released a language model with a very permissive license. The reason is that to solve some of these large challenges that we talk about, like personally identifiable information, your social security number is probably in a data set somewhere. Your phone number, your address, it's all probably in a data set somewhere because it's on the internet. And so in order to solve these big problems, like how do we remove those? Bias, toxicity, how do we address that? We believe that you need to open up the full stack of the models so the research community can get in there, kick the tires, dig through it, and come up with solutions. And so other models are released in ways where they may release the code, they may release the weights. Very few people are releasing all of that plus the data. And so it's really, when you think about what goes out in a model so that then someone can build something on top of it or do research, for example, there's many components. We are releasing all of the components with clear documentation around how it was developed, what trade-offs were made, what decisions were made, so that people can understand and learn about these systems. Because one of the pillars of my work is AI literacy. We have a giant challenge with AI literacy in the general population, and opportunity after opportunity is passing companies by to seize the moment and educate the public. I was just chatting with someone about the Google Gemini debacle that just happened, and that was such a learning opportunity. This is why the system did that. This is how it happened. Let's take this opportunity to share some education, and instead it was like, shut it down. And obviously there's incentives to do that when you're a company and there are stakeholders and all of the things, but it's a tremendous loss to the community to not understand why images were generated that were generated, why the Pope from 1820 was an Asian woman. There's a reason that happened, and that was a huge moment to share. So open source is also an AI literacy tool, and that's why we release everything we do and have done since we started in 2014. Everything's released openly for that specific reason.
And I would say there is a place for open source and proprietary software. And I know Microsoft has sort of come around on that topic over some number of years, and some of you are smiling about that. So. But we probably saw we just announced an investment and a partnership with Mistral, an open source company in France. So there is, for all the reasons that you've talked about, really great reasons for open source. On the other hand, you may not want to have an open source software system that's used by our National Secretary of Defense and security systems. Those systems you may want to maintain proprietary. So there is absolutely a place for both, and for the great reasons you identify as well.
And I think you bring up a point, which is the base model versus the system built on top of it. Healthcare data should not be public, to be clear. If you're taking a model and then you're adapting it with your own data, that should not be public. But the base layer is what is in there, what's under the hood, why is it making the decision, in order to answer those big questions. So I want to clarify the difference between models and systems, and you may have a better definition for those than my quick summary, but I think they're often conflated. If I say model, you might think of ChatGPT or the app, and that's built on top of a model, right? And so just making that distinction.
I guess I just want to agree here. I think there's a very constructive and powerful kind of industry dynamic where there's a lot of exploration that goes on with, let's call them open weights, models where like the key parameters are out there for everybody to learn from. But then, with some learning in place, right, like to push it to the next level, it really does cost quite a bit. These architectures that we're working with are not that efficient, honestly, and so you got to make a certain level investment to go to the next level. And that, you're going to be much more likely to want to have proprietary, because somehow you got to, earn the money that went into it. But then after you've shown everybody, the startup has, shown the world that, hey, this thing is actually doing something useful, everyone else goes, aha, in the open source community, and then they kind of figure out the essence, and then they move that open portion of it forward, and now everybody can debug that, and the cycle chases itself. And so that's part of the reason things are moving fast, is that we do have, I think, a very productive dynamic going on.
And we are where we are today with AI in everyone's pockets because it was open. It was only recently closed, right? AI was built on research, that was built on research, that caused the next breakthrough, and the chain kind of ended with, in the past couple of years. I get why. I also think we deserve to understand more as this technology leads us all into the future.
So after this question, we're going to go to open questions. So if you have one, feel free to start lining up. As you talk with customers, with regulatory bodies, with technologists and ethicists, what are the kind of biggest or most important risks that you're really focusing on? Is it the hyperbolic, I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but the really scary doomsday stuff, the bias, there's a whole smattering. How do you think about that, and how are you and is the community debating this, kind of sifting through all that?
I think, I'll start, and I know everybody will have a slightly different answer. We're obviously thinking about all kinds of risks. We are, we're talking about a huge variety of them. But one of the things that I think that I would love to highlight is election integrity. We have something like 60 countries in the world that will be having elections between March and the end of the year. And artificial intelligence has been used by foreign actors in the United States, 2016 for sure, 2020. We expect it will be going forward. And right now, we are very, very focused on what we can do to ensure election integrity. And I think it's critical for democracy. So recently, last week, Microsoft and 20 other companies signed a pact which we will continue to develop, that started with commitments to continue to develop what's called provenance or governance, so that you understand whether the content that you're looking at has been altered. And going forward, then even potentially putting a form of a watermark, if you think about watermark on paper, to ensure the old contract was the real thing because it had the watermark, to put some sort of a digital watermark on content so that you can ensure that it has not been altered. To be able to immediately identify and have a place for politicians and elected officials to go to identify when they think an image of themselves has been altered or a video has been altered, to immediately get some support and response for taking it down and mitigating it, and then continuing the work that we've talked about already, which is fluency in what the technology is, so that citizens can really make good judgments about whether something is real or whether something has been altered. So all three of those things are important. We'll be going forward with driving the technology. It's that sort of provenance, but it's also the kinds of things we've already talked about, how we ensure that the products we are releasing are as impermeable as possible from, a bad use. And we're not going to get there. We're just not going to get there. So it will be really important for the technology to move forward. It will be important for us to be able to detect, to take down, to be as transparent as possible, and folks in this room, including me, becoming more educated about how to recognize if something is fake.
There's a lot of risk, right? We just can't ignore that. There's a lot of risk. Misinformation, election integrity, it's all true that there is something to worry about sort of around every corner. And I'm not saying that to be, a pessimist. I am an AI optimist. I also just think you need to have someone who's offering the counterpoint. And sadly, I've chosen to wear that hat at a research institute focused on AI. But I think the risk that sort of scares me most is less the bad actors, because people are focused on that. It's the people who just don't know and then deploy the thing. I always use this example of, a mental health chatbot that someone with the best of intentions thought, oh my gosh, I could reach more people if I only pick up X language model and train it so that it could respond in this chatbot fashion to like a crisis text line, not the actual crisis text line. They're doing great work with AI. But then the chatbot starts encouraging a user in a scary situation to harm themselves or do something bad, and it is totally not intentional. And so that's the risk I worry about, because the solution to that is complicated. It's AI literacy, it's open models, it's transparency across the board, and there's just so many things that need to be in the right place. So I would say it's those unintended, non-malicious actors who are just going about their day with this technology that's going to make them money, and our incentive structures lined up to do that, and it can cause harm.
Yes, I'm going to just agree with everybody that there's risk, and there's risks at different levels. So at the product level, there's lots of different risks, and you can sort of systematically articulate the categories and figure out based on your use case what you should be testing and stuff. But then on the deployer side, AWS offers all sorts of services, right? You need to equip people to be able to test, as I talked about before. You can't just invite them to buy books on statistics and they'll be fine. No, you've got to sort of make it easy to do the things they need to do to check for themselves. But then at the societal level, as we're talking about here, particularly with election misinformation and disinformation, and other issues as well, right? We need to have, industry organizations that are sharing information and working together to kind of, learn more rapidly about what steps to take. We need public-private partnerships. We need education. I mean, if you go back to AI being at its core statistics, okay, what would you do if you were told statistics was part of your life, what would you do differently, right? Would you want to learn something about it? Yes. So how do we do that? And I know, AWS, for example, has a university. You can go you can take a course on responsible AI. There's plenty of other places you can take courses on it and things. But we have to sort of get people thinking that this is not that mysterious under the hood. Yes, there's some mystery, but it is something you can grapple with, you're entitled to grapple with, and you kind of must grapple with, because it really is, if we can use this wisely, it'll be very effective. So I'll just pause there.
Okay, we have time for about 3 questions, so who's up first?
First, I just want to thank our panelists tonight. You all are truly fantastic, really covering a lot of ground. Kind of a 2-part question. So I'm going to pivot to the optimism, because what we hear, what we read is a lot of fear factor. I try to set a boundary around that. And so if you could provide just kind of your top 1 or 2 anecdotals. There's healthcare mentioned here earlier this evening. And then second, related to that, it seems like we're kind of the center of gravity for a lot of good education and tech understanding, and perhaps even solutions that could be global. So how are we uniquely situated in this region, economically, ethically, whatever, in order to, take that optimism and maybe spread that in a way that can have more long-term impact?
Well, I'll start, and I'd love to hear the thoughts of the panelists. I talked right at the break to one of the women that I respect most in the world, who's sitting in the back. I won't name her. But she told me about a newsletter that she received from Fred Hutch, which identified its use of artificial intelligence to examine data sets to identify earlier than has been known before a marker to identify breast cancer in women. And it still means that a radiologist needs to be involved. The radiologist, just in addition to his medical background, needs to know a little something about statistics, But I think the promise for medical research is just really, really amazing. If you really think about it, the promise for any kind of in-depth research is really, really amazing. I mean, I think people are starting to get excited about the possibilities of artificial intelligence in identifying ways in which we can more faster find ways to mitigate climate issues, for example. So I think if you take about any area of deep research with the right researchers, I think there is just some tremendously optimistic things that can happen. And this region, boy, yes, we are, between Allen, between Microsoft, between Amazon, between UW, one of the finest research institutions in the world, working together. I think this is really, really an amazing, corner of the world right now.
I would triple click the healthcare applications. It's every day there's some new breakthrough that I'm like, oh my gosh. Pancreatic cancer, one of the deadliest cancers in the world. It's often detected when it's way too late. There's a new technology out that can predict your chances of getting pancreatic cancer, and it predicts it at a state in which it's curable. My father-in-law passed away from pancreatic cancer last summer. Too late. It was detected, and it within months. And that is the typical story. Education has tremendous potential with AI, personalized learning, alleviating teacher burden, streamlining processes with districts so that more attention can be paid to students. It really is limitless. We have teams at AI2 working on applied science in climate. I just hosted a panel in DC with senators and researchers and really started to have a robust discussion about AI and its climate impacts and potential. We have a team working on, which is very pertinent to our region, wildfires, how to detect fuel sources on the ground to mitigate for wildfires. So there really is boundless potential, so much so that I often say the trade-offs are maybe such that the benefits do outweigh the harms, I know, oh my goodness. But we just don't, we need to be able to create a space, and I think this is maybe where our region can play a role. We need to create a space where all of those conversations can happen. We need to be able to dream big, and we also need to put all of the caveats on top of those things and not have people talking past each other. So I think if we can take all of the brain power that we have in this region and turn it to an AI literacy focus and creating community where we can make great progress safely, that would be my dream.
All right, I'll just add a couple of things. One of which is that there's magically cool stuff that's possible in healthcare and education and other domains near and dear to all our hearts, but there's also a lot to be done in the purely mundane, like stacks of documents that you don't want to kind of summarize by hand. It's just like the administrative nightmares of people's lives can be, vanquished, leaving people free to do more creative things. So there's that. And then there's so much discussion of generative AI, but how about what I guess you would call now traditional AI, all the other stuff? That's still just as useful. And there's going to be lots of things discovered there as well. So I do think, the world is our oyster here.
Thank goodness for spam filters.
Yes.
It's so true.
Pivot to some entertaining philosophical views, but that go to the mundane aspect that you're talking about. So we've kind of said that AI ultimately is just this random number statistical engine. Okay, but my question is how far away is that from our actual own brains, who basically are generating tons of ideas, and our culture puts a filter on all of those interactions going on in our brain and creates what this sense of consciousness is. So how far away, or how do you see that difference between AI in its nascent stage right now and our brain structure, which is really kind of a statistical process just as much, that we have learned to put this guise of we're smarter and all of that, but really all we are is a chemical interaction going on in our brain.
I think that means I'm hungry for dinner, actually. I bet Peter has a great answer to that. I guess what I would say, again, just sort of, I'm not the technologist, but there will be things that AI will never know. there will be certain amounts of, not certain amounts, empathy that AI will never know. I often use an example of my nephew who's an agronomist who is starting to use AI, and I've been exposing him to AI, and he at first was just thinking he wouldn't have a job. And I said, you know, this is a tool for you. You know, this tool will never tell you, you know, whether that farmer's kid kept him awake all night. This tool will never tell you what happened in this little corner of the field because you've been farming it for 50 years. There will be things that, you know, that AI, you know, should not do, but there will also be things that it cannot do because in essence, it's not sentient, you know? I mean, you might tell us that one day you think it will be, Peter, I don't know.
I think when people are building things, they mostly want to build like a tool that's fit for a purpose. You know, and that's not entirely, you don't want your tool getting mad at you and running off and doing something nutty. So even if one day we could build in those features, I'm not sure we would do it in the normal course of business.
Hi. Fantastic panel. Exciting to have experts here to be able to promote literacy in AI. My question revolves around the current AI arms race in developing more models and how that's yielding a dramatic acceleration in the reduction of cost of intelligence. You have that relationship between the cost of energy and the cost of intelligence. Just as context for people who aren't aware. And given your expertise, how do you see human collaboration with superintelligence transform society? I would argue, as an AI startup founder, that cutting-edge models like Gemini 1.5 or Claude 3 aren't limited necessarily by their weights and biases or the technology behind them, by simply human imagination and our capacity to ask great questions. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I would just say, I don't ever want to live in a world where there are no humans anymore. And the arms race conversation is scary to me because it's, first of all, I think comparing it to an arms race is just dangerous language. What is happening, though, is I understand why people say that because, across the globe, it's who's going to, Putin famously said whoever owns the AI owns the world, before ChatGPT, by the way. This was, a while ago. And so there is a competitive edge to developing faster and better and bigger and more. And the scary thing about that is to what end? Why are we doing it? AI isn't the answer to everything, nor should it be. I always think, imagine your, loved one is in an operating room. Are you going to trust the technology only, or are you going to want a human who's delivering empathy in the message as well and explaining your follow-up question? Context matters, and so I don't know, I don't know what the world would look like if we continue down this fast and furious path. I'm hoping it's a pendulum swing, and eventually we level out somewhere in the middle. I think that how humans and superintelligence interact. I even, I don't know that superintelligence will arrive in my lifetime. I hope it doesn't, because I think we as humans, humanity is at stake if that were to be the case. And I don't mean to sound very dramatic and philosophical, but when you think about what makes us human, it's the fact that I scoop my kiddo up when she scrapes her knee and then put the Band-Aid on. I don't want a robot to ever do that. I don't want a super intelligent being to fly the Band-Aid in with their mind or. And so I think we need to start questioning to what end. There are global conversations that have to happen around national security. When I talk about open, a lot of people are like, but what about China? China has a model already, I'm sure, that is just as capable as all of the models we have here. So it is important, and I completely understand that language. I think, diplomacy needs to play a role. All of the things sanctions, all the things that we're doing. Because if we just throw it all in and say we're just all going to go race down the road, I do worry about our future.
And I would guess there's probably not a clear definition of superintelligence in the room either, too. So, you know, there's all that.
OpenAI's board decided.
Right. What I guess broadly I would say is, you know, this is incredible technology, just as incredible technology has been developed in other centuries as well. I think this is a time to, you know, appeal to our better angels, you know, that who we are as humans and what we want from the technology and what we don't want from the technology. And I think those conversations occur, you know, just in terms of a family, and they also need to occur across nation states. We'll need to have, you know, the equivalent of a Geneva Convention thinking about how the technology is used, for example. And those are not bad models to draw from in history. So I think that this is a technology that I'm ultimately optimistic about. I guess we say clear-eyed optimism about.
Yeah, I guess if I had to add one thought here, it would be that, you know, unlike many other sort of technical revolutions, this one has activated the policy side early in the cycle. And I think that's very productive. I mean, we're having conversations like this at a much earlier time in the sort of the technical S-curve, the technology S-curve than we did before. So, you know, this is all good. We are coming up with standards. ISO 42001 got approved in December. I mean, industry is having lots of conversations about how you do this responsibly, even if everyone doesn't have the same definition. They all kind of have the same idea. And again, to the earlier point I made about building tools fit for purpose, I mean, there's a lot of really hard problems. Like if you wanted to build new batteries, like how do you investigate all the different relationships between lithium atoms and these other different chemicals? Like it's like a really hard problem for a human to wade through. Or if you're in organic chemistry, if any of you ever got a PhD in organic chemistry, you know, I don't know how many hours you spent in the lab, like grinding through experiments, right? This kind of stuff, like that's where you're going to put your investment. It's like doing these things that you're pretty sure that tech can do well, that we can't do. Why would you spend money on duplicating, you know, something that would be fun to do? Anyway.
I guess, can you help for a final question? You know, Kelly had said in the last panel about how, you know, there are already developments in the work. And so not looking to superintelligence, but in the midterm, what should we be expecting as kind of the next phase? We're sort of, what, 18-ish months into this era, if you will, this phase. What comes next? How fast is that next step? Is there an obvious step? Is it a gradual to something? How do we wrap our heads around what to be looking for as we think about what to do about it?
It sounds like such an accelerated time frame. 18 months like in a technology development trajectory, this is like, where's the breathing room, right? Maybe that it's time to breathe a little bit and just realize that we have some cool models. There's a couple of standard architectures in the industry, diffusion architecture, transformer architecture. They have, there's quite a bit that's not fully understood about them, but their limitations are still quite significant, right? And there's lots of people trying to think about, well, how could we do this much more efficiently? Or, you know, how could we address issues of hallucination much more systematically? So I think there's going to continue to be incremental, you know, work. Quite a bit of it, actually. And we're going to end up with a situation, we're already, I think you alluded to how many models, you know, are in your system. We're going to be living in a hybrid world with not one model that rules them all. Lots of different models. Big ones, medium ones, small ones, lots of small ones. No one wants to pay, you know, a lot of money for a large one to do a very simple thing, right? So it's just going to be hybrid, lots of experimentation, some proprietary, some open, and we'll kind of work our way through this complexity, and people will begin to assemble successful stories. Hey, it worked here, it worked there, and that, you know, and it didn't work over here also will happen, and you know, you won't go there and you will go over here, and it'll kind of proceed like that. If you're asking for what is the next magical bullet that will drop, I can't predict that. If I could, I would run out and go invest in it, but I don't I don't know it.
I really agree with you. I think that there will be some, I'm hoping, going forward, some developments that won't catch everyone's eyes, but they're going to be really, really foundational and important for the ongoing development of the technology. You mentioned battery life. That is a huge, huge issue. Energy consumption of the databases and the models. It will be just critically important for us to get more energy efficient with our data centers in order for us to be responsible and for us to continue to develop the data sets and the work. So we're going to, I think, see some things that won't, be really snazzy, but they will be absolutely critical to move us forward.
I think too, just some concrete things. I think multimodal models will continue, text to video to image to voice. I think those models will continue to emerge. Sora came out and does beautiful video recently. I know there's work happening around smaller models because how big can you get? So how do you perfect or connect smaller models in the field? And so that's exciting. And I think policy, what else is coming next? I think policy, there's not a lot of optimism, frankly, at the federal level that policy will pass. There's great legislation in the pipeline, and there's not a lot of optimism. Donald Trump said on his first day in office he will overturn Biden's executive order if he didn't even say if he's elected, I'm adding if he's elected. But there may be some turmoil that emerges. And so policy, though, is doing things like they're leading climate. There's climate legislation, on reporting. These are all great steps. And so I also don't want to lose sight of the, momentum that's kind of been garnered. But I think, this is a crazy year with this election that's coming up. I would expect some turmoil.
Thank you all so much. Thank you all for your questions.
Osteoarthritis sucks, I'm telling you. Did you guys enjoy this? Hey, well, I want to say thank you to Mary, Nicole, Peter, Jim, and Kelly for coming here today and really giving us some insight on AI and what's next and giving us I think there were some action items in there too, those next steps. So hopefully you walked away with a bit more education and that you've been able to network with people sitting next to you, around you. We're just so grateful to have you here today. Again, I want to thank Comcast as our presenting sponsor. We wouldn't be able to do this without them, so thank you very much. And again, thank you to our partnership with WTIA. This was very fun. Thank you so much. When you will get an evaluation form tonight when you get home in your email, so please take a moment to fill it out for us. It's really super helpful for us for when we're planning these types of events. I want to tell you about our next 3 cocktails because then we are going to go on a summer break after June. The one I'm super excited about is next month in April. We are launching our Civically Engaged Youth Council. So that's going to be comprised of those 15 to 24. So, and they're really the ones that we need to listen to right now. So we're going to do that here. Actually, if you're a member, we're going to have a special reception ahead of that so you can talk to them before everybody else does. But all 4 of them, if you haven't been to our website, please go and check it out. The 4 young people that we have that are going to be leading this youth council are doing super amazing things already. And we're going to be inviting elected officials and youth organizations to come out. So you come out as well, but also if you know people in those groups, please invite them to come. In May, I heard a lot about mental health, so we actually are going to be doing some panels around mental health because May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so I heard a couple of things here that I want to research on and give you back, so please come out for that. And then in June, when we go on our break, we're going to talk a little bit more about the election stuff because we have a big election coming up this year, not just presidential, but statewide and U.S. Senate. And City Club will be doing a lot of work around debates in that space. So please come out and hang out with us there. Finally, this is Women's History Month. I would be remiss not to say that. So happy Women's History Month. I know International Women's Day is this Friday. Our friends here at the Collective are actually having a free event here, like a women's expo. So they are inviting you to come. And with that, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to my team. Thank you to everybody here. And thank you so much for giving us your evening tonight. And if you feel so inclined, become a member or become a monthly donor, because we're only able to do this with your support. This is expensive, guys. But it's so much fun, right? And we're learning so much. So please, I ask you to take that consideration. Thank you and good night.